Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. The great crystalline chamber of the Zaltharian War Council pulsed with shifting energy, a symphony of shifting light patterns that reflected off the polished, obsidian-like walls. It was a room designed not for spectacle, but for calculation, a place where empires were judged and entire civilizations condemned before a single warship was deployed. The figures standing in the circle were unmoving, their tall, segmented forms casting elongated shadows across the floor. Their exoskeletal armor shimmered under the shifting glow, their war cloaks smooth and undisturbed. The Zaltharian did not fidget, did not betray hesitation or doubt. Their kind had evolved beyond the inefficiency of impulsive reactions. Every movement was precise, every decision absolute. At the center of the chamber, the supreme strategist raised a single clawed hand, and the room darkened. A holographic projection flared to life above them, a massive sphere rotating slowly in the void, its surface covered in swirling blue oceans and scattered continents. Earth, the human species, the strategist began, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of finality. Unlike the lesser civilizations we have encountered, their existence defies statistical projection. Their war should have shattered them. Their self-destructive nature should have ensured their extinction. And yet, despite all logic, they persist. They do not simply survive conflict. They thrive in it. It forges them. The Council remained silent, absorbing the implications. The Zaltharian Empire had spent millennia refining its conquest strategies, dismantling entire planetary civilizations with calculated precision. They had crushed species that had outpaced humanity in technological advancement by centuries. And yet, the supreme strategist was telling them that these primitive beings, who had barely taken their first steps beyond their homeworld, were a threat. Then we eliminate them now, one of the generals stated plainly. Orbital bombardment. Their world burns before they leave their cradle. The strategist turned his gaze toward the speaker. A crude approach, and ineffective. With a motion of his fingers, the holographic image of Earth fragmented, splintering into different time periods, flickering through wars, revolutions, the rise and fall of empires. Humanity has suffered near extinction before. Their history is an unbroken chain of catastrophe, each event pushing them further toward dominance. If we attack them now, we do not destroy them. We become their next great war. His voice sharpened. And if history has shown us anything, is that they will adapt, they will unify, and they will retaliate. The chamber dimmed further, the projection shifting, rewinding through time. Cities crumbled backward into stone fortresses, which collapsed into nomadic camps. The images became more chaotic, battles fought with fire and bronze, sieges waged with steel and blood. Then, further still, to a time when mankind was barely more than scattered tribes. We will go back, the supreme strategist said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. Before they become a threat, before they learn the art of war. There was a pause, not of uncertainty, but of consideration. Time warfare was a dangerous tool, even for the Zaltharian. They had used it sparingly in the past, erasing troublesome enemies before they had reached their potential. But this was different. One of the war scholars spoke. And how far back must we go? The projection zoomed in on a battlefield, smoke rising from burning villages. Bodies littered the ground, men and horses alike, their armor soaked in mud and blood. And at the center of it all, a lone figure sat atop a black horse, watching as the flames consumed the remains of his enemies. The alien script beside him translated itself into a name. Genghis Khan. The supreme strategist clasped his hands together. We start with the Mongols. The first temporal breach split the sky over the Mongolian steppes with a soundless shimmer, bending the very air around it. It was a subtle thing at first, a distortion in the atmosphere, like heat rising from the sands. Then, with a pulse of energy, it widened, tearing through the fabric of time itself. Zaltharian soldiers emerged in formation, their obsidian-like armor refracting the dim glow of the moon. Their weapons hummed with silent lethality, designed for clean, efficient extermination. They moved with the calculated precision of a force that had already won the battle before it began. No human could have anticipated their arrival. No human could have seen them coming. Except one. Genghis Khan had spent his life reading the land, understanding the unspoken language of the wind, the animals, the silence before an ambush. And now, something was wrong. He had felt it before he saw it. The shift in the air. The way his horse had stilled beneath him. The unnatural stillness of the night. His gaze swept the ridge below, his eyes narrowing. The figures moving through the darkness were unlike anything he had seen before. They bore no banners, carried no torches, moved with an unnatural fluidity. They did not belong to any of the warring clans. They did not belong to this world. And yet, they moved toward his encampment as if they intended to claim it. He did not know who they were, but he knew an invasion when he saw one. His grip tightened around the reins. The Zaltharian had come for the Mongols. They had come to erase the greatest warlord in human history before his empire could rise. But they had made a mistake, because the Mongols did not fear war. They were war. The horses stirred uneasily, their ears pinned back. The wolves had stopped howling. The night, usually alive with the sounds of the steppe, had fallen into an unnatural silence. Genghis Khan took this as a warning. He had spent a lifetime listening to the land, reading its signs, and the land was telling him something was coming. He watched the valley below, where his camp lay nestled in the moonlit darkness. The figures approaching from the ridge moved with a precision unlike anything he had seen before. They bore no banners, no torches, no markings of any known tribe. Their armor gleamed black, rippling like oil against the dim light. Their formation was tight, synchronized, moving with a rhythm that spoke of cold calculation rather than human instinct. Genghis Khan's fingers tightened around the reins of a stallion. He did not know who these invaders were, but he knew one thing for certain. They were not men. Beside him, Subutai, his greatest general, shifted in his saddle, his expression unreadable. The man had faced countless enemies, outmaneuvered armies many times the size of his own, and yet even he seemed uneasy. "You see them?" Genghis asked. Subutai nodded once. "I see men who do not belong to this earth." Genghis exhaled slowly. Not men. Something else. Below, the invaders moved with quiet confidence, their approach steady. They think they have already won. A mistake. Genghis lifted his hand, a signal so small, so imperceptible, that no outsider would have noticed. But his warriors did. The hills around them remained still, but he knew that his men were already moving. The Mongols were not a people of hesitation. They were people of action. Then, a scout emerged from the darkness, his horse lathered with sweat, his face pale. He did not dismount. That alone told Genghis everything. "They carry weapons of fire and light," the scout said breathlessly. "They do not fight like men." Genghis Khan barely reacted. "They bleed." The scout hesitated. "We do not know." Genghis Khan's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "Then we will find out." A single war cry shattered the silence. Then chaos. The first wave of Mongol archers fired, their arrows slicing through the air in a perfect arc. The night sky darkened with their deadly rain. The Zaltharian soldiers, for all their technology, had not anticipated this. But as the arrows struck, a shimmering energy rippled across their armor, deflecting the impact. Genghis Khan watched carefully. So not so easily killed. Good. A challenge. The Zaltharian soldiers reacted with inhuman speed. Their weapons, sleek rods that pulsed with a strange, unnatural glow, hummed with energy before unleashing bolts of searing blue light. The first row of Mongol warriors never had a chance to scream. Their bodies fell in smoking heaps, the ground beneath them scorched black. Subutai barely flinched. "Their weapons are fast, but they are not faster than us," Genghis replied. He gave a second signal. The Mongols moved like a storm, their horses weaving in and out of range before the Zaltharian soldiers could track their movements. They never remained in one place long enough to be pinned down. Where one warrior fell, 3 more took his place. Their arrows now aimed for the gaps in the aliens' armor, testing for weaknesses. Then, the Mongols vanished. The Zaltharian forces hesitated. Their movements, so calculated moments ago, faltered. They had come expecting an army that would fight and die in straight lines. Instead, they had entered a war unlike any they had known. Genghis Khan watched from the ridge, reading their confusion. They do not understand this land. They do not understand us. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the valley, spoken in a language Genghis had never heard before. A figure stepped forward from the enemy ranks, clad in heavier armor than the rest. A leader. His voice carried a metallic edge, distorted by something unnatural. Primitive, the alien commander said. You delay the inevitable. Genghis Khan did not move. Then, with deliberate slowness, he dismounted his horse. He handed the reins to Subutai, rolling his shoulders as he stepped forward. His men did not question him. Tell me, he called out in a voice that carried across the battlefield. What land do you hail from? The commander did not answer. Genghis tilted his head slightly. No banners, no tribes, no faces. You march into another man's land without so much as a name. His smile was slow, sharp. That makes you nothing. The Zaltharian commander raised his weapon, the energy humming louder. You do not understand what you face. Genghis Khan's expression did not waver. Neither do you. Then, without warning, he lunged. The alien fired, but he was too slow. Genghis was inside his guard before the shot left the weapon. He caught the commander's wrist, twisting with brutal force. There was a sharp, metallic shriek as the alien's armor buckled. The weapon fell from the commander's grip. Genghis did not hesitate. He drove his dagger into the gap beneath the alien's helmet, where the armor was weakest. The blade sank deep. The Zaltharian commander staggered. For the first time since their arrival, one of them fell. Genghis Khan turned to his men. His voice was calm, certain. They can die. A roar erupted from the Mongols. The aliens had come expecting an execution. Instead, they had awakened war. The Zaltharian forces did not retreat immediately. They had not yet accepted what was happening. But as more of their kind fell, their formations broke. Then, in the sky above, a pulse of light erupted, a beacon, a signal. Reinforcements were coming. Genghis Khan exhaled, watching the fading glow. He had seen empires crumble, but he had never seen one arrive from the stars. He turned to Subutai. We take the fight to them. And with that, the Mongols vanished into the night once more, leaving the Zaltharian forces scrambling in the dark, leaderless, bleeding, and for the first time in their existence, afraid. The beacon flared. A pulse of unnatural light cut through the night, turning the sky into an eerie violet haze. Mongol horses reared, eyes wide with terror, their instincts recoiling from something that did not belong to this world. Warriors muttered among themselves, some making quiet prayers to Tungri, others gripping their weapons tighter, knuckles white. The steppe had seen countless battles, but never had it witnessed a war against something beyond the reach of gods or men. Genghis Khan sat motionless atop his horse, watching the disturbance with the stillness of a predator studying unfamiliar prey. His mind worked quickly, cataloging every anomaly. The sudden tremor in the ground, the way the air crackled with invisible energy, the soundless pressure in his skull, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The Zaltharian did not fight like men. That much had become clear. Subutai rode up beside him, his expression sharp, calculating. They are coming, he said simply. They never left, Genghis murmured. Even in death, the enemy had refused to stay down. He had seen them rise, their shattered bodies knitting themselves back together, their wounds closing as if death were nothing but a passing inconvenience. The Mongols had fought ghosts before. Stories of spirits and restless souls haunted their legends. But these creatures were not spirits. They bled. They could be cut. And yet they did not die. He turned his gaze back to the beacon, still pulsing, still reaching for something beyond the sky. A call for aid. He knew the answer was coming. A sharp cry rang out from the eastern ridges. Scouts! The Mongols were never blind in battle, never unprepared. Genghis spurred his horse forward, cresting the nearest hill just as the air ripped open. The Zaltharian did not descend from the heavens like gods. They stepped through, from nowhere, from nothing, as if they had walked between the fabric of reality itself. The first wave had been warriors, armored and lethal. These were different, larger, heavier. Their armor was darker, no longer smooth like polished obsidian but jagged, shifting like living metal. Their weapons pulsed and flickered, changing shape as they moved. Their ranks did not falter, did not shift, did not breathe. They moved as one, perfectly synchronized, as if a single will guided every step. A hive. Genghis Khan exhaled slowly. Good. A challenge. He turned to Subutai, who was already studying their movements, his sharp mind dissecting their weaknesses before the first blow had fallen. They fight like one, the general observed. Then we break them apart, Genghis replied. There was no need for further orders. The Mongols did not wait for war to come to them. They rode first. The first charge struck with the force of a storm, hooves thundering against the earth, a wall of dust rising in their wake. Arrows flew, aimed not at the enemy's bodies, but the ground around them, kicking up dirt, forcing them to shift. The Zaltharian adjusted quickly, their weapons reshaping mid-strike, adapting to the Mongol speed. They fired, and men fell, but not fast enough. The Mongols were already within striking distance. Genghis Khan moved like a shadow through the chaos, sword flashing as he tore through the gaps in their armor. He did not fight like a king. He fought like a man who had spent his life in war. A Zaltharian turned its weapon on him, but before it could fire, an axe split through its shoulder, burying deep into the unnatural metal. The creature staggered, its body flickering. Then a second strike severed its head. A moment of stillness. Then the body rose again. Genghis did not flinch, but something cold curled in his gut. The battle should have ended there. The Zaltharian who had fallen should have stayed fallen. Instead, their wounds sealed, their broken forms reassembled. Their bodies flickered like dying embers before solidifying once more. They were undoing death. A warrior near him gasped. Dark spirits, he whispered. Another spat on the ground, making a warding gesture against evil. Genghis Khan watched the Zaltharian rise, his mind already shifting. If an enemy could not be killed, then they had to be contained. The battlefield was open, too exposed. The Mongols thrived in movement, in control of the terrain. Here, they were trapped in a war of attrition against an enemy that would never tire, never weaken. That was unacceptable. His eyes swept the land, the ridge, the valley below, the dry grass waiting, hungry for flame. He turned to Subutai. We lead them to the valley. The general understood instantly. No hesitation, no questions. He signaled to the riders, and, as one, the Mongols turned. To an outsider, it would have looked like retreat. But the Mongols did not retreat. They only moved where the enemy followed, and the Zaltharian followed. They pursued in perfect formation, unthinking, unyielding, predictable. By the time the last Mongol crested the hill, the Zaltharian were where they needed to be. Genghis Khan raised his arm. Now! 100 flaming arrows rained down from the cliffs above. The dry grass ignited in an instant. The valley became an inferno. The Zaltharian, unafraid of death, had walked into it willingly. But this was not death. This was something worse. Their shields flickered, their armor superheating. The ground beneath them turned molten. Their perfect formation became chaos. For the first time, they broke. Genghis Khan watched, his breath steady. He had fought many enemies, but never one that did not fear death. So he had given them something else to fear. Subutai rode up beside him, the fire reflecting in his eyes. They will return, he said. Genghis nodded. So will we. Then, above them, another beacon flared. This one read. Subutai exhaled. That is new. Genghis Khan smiled, sharp as a blade. Then we will learn. Because the Mongols had never lost a war, and they were not about to start now. The red beacon pulsed like a heartbeat in the sky. Unlike the first, which had been a cold, sterile signal, This one felt different, angrier, almost alive. It bathed the battlefield in crimson light, painting the scorched valley in shades of blood. The Mongols stood among the ruins of their victory, the air thick with the acrid scent of burnt flesh and melted armor, their eyes fixed on the ominous glow above. Genghis Khan sat astride his horse at the ridge's edge, watching, waiting. He had seen empires fall, had crushed kings beneath his heel, had waged war against men who thought themselves untouchable. But never had he fought an enemy that did not bleed as men did, that did not break when broken. The Zaltharian had risen from their own ashes, their bodies defying death itself. He had set fire to them, and still they had called for more. Subutai approached, his horse moving at a measured pace. He was a man who did not rattle easily, who studied the art of war with a cold, unshakable intellect. But now his brow was furrowed. "They will not burn a second time," he said. "They never burned the first time," Genghis replied. "They screamed. That is different." Subutai considered this, then nodded. "Pain. They feel it. Then we give them more." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant thunder. Except there were no clouds in the sky. Genghis turned his gaze eastward. The horizon trembled. The earth beneath them vibrated with something vast, something approaching. The horses snorted and shifted uneasily, stamping their hooves against the dirt. Then they saw it. The Zaltharian were no longer sending warriors. They were sending something else. A shape emerged from the horizon, cutting through the dust like the prow of an unseen ship. It was unlike anything the Mongols had faced before. Not men, not machines, but something in between. A towering construct of shifting black metal, its form constantly in motion, its edges dissolving and reforming as though it could not decide on a single shape. Where the previous warriors had been cold and mechanical, this was something worse, something alive. Genghis Khan had never known fear, but he knew the weight of an enemy worth fearing. The construct moved without haste, without sound, gliding across the land as if it owned it. And behind it, marching in perfect synchrony, were more Zaltharian soldiers, their armor reflecting the beacon's red glow, their weapons no longer pulsing with energy, but thrumming with something deeper, something ancient. A different breed. The first waves had been scouts. This was their war machine. Subutai was the first to speak. "How do you kill something that is not a thing?" Genghis Khan did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the way it moved, the way it interacted with the land. It did not leave footprints. It did not disturb the dust. It was here but did not belong. His grip on his reins tightened. "You make it belong." A scout rode up at full speed, his face drawn with urgency. It does not fight as the others do. It does not react to arrows. It does not move as flesh moves. The words caught in his throat, as if even speaking of it was wrong. Genghis looked at the warriors behind him, the men who had followed him across deserts, through mountains, into the hearts of empires that had thought themselves unbreakable. They waited for his command. He had never lost a war. He would not start now. "Then we do not fight it," he said at last. "We trap it." Subutai understood instantly. The gorge. Genghis nodded. A deep ravine cut through the land to the north, a jagged wound in the steppe. The Mongols had used it before, centuries ago, to break enemy lines, to force foes into positions they could not escape. But this was no ordinary enemy. "You think it could be led?" Subutai asked. "Everything follows something," Genghis said. "Even the sea follows the moon." He turned his horse sharply and signaled. The Mongol riders moved like a single body, fanning out, preparing the bait. The goal was not to fight. Not yet. The goal was to pull. The first wave of riders approached the construct cautiously. It did not react. They loosed arrows, not at it, but around it, testing, searching for a response. Nothing. Then one arrow, one lucky, foolish arrow, grazed the surface of its ever-shifting form. The construct moved. It did not lurch. It did not charge. It collapsed and reformed, surging forward as if it had always been moving, its mass pulling itself toward the disturbance like a predator drawn to blood in the water. The Mongols turned and ran. The steppe became a blur, hooves pounding against the earth as the riders led the construct northward toward the ravine. The Zaltharian followed, their formations unbroken, their movements calculated. Genghis Khan and Subutai rode ahead, their minds working in tandem, watching the land, timing every moment. The trap had to be perfect. There would be no second chance. The ravine came into view, its dark maw waiting. The Mongols split, peeling off in both directions, leaving nothing in front of the advancing construct but empty space. It did not stop. It surged forward, weightless yet heavy, a force that did not belong to this world. And then suddenly, it fell. The moment it crossed the ravine's edge, its form collapsed inward, as if the laws of this world had finally rejected it. The air itself tore, space folding and writhing, and then silence. The Mongols waited for it to rise, for it to reassemble, for it to undo what had been done. It did not. The warriors exhaled, some whispering prayers of thanks, others watching, waiting, unwilling to believe it was over. Genghis Khan did not turn away. He watched the ravine, watched the spot where it had fallen, his mind already working. This was not the last of them. Subutai sat back in his saddle. If they could be trapped, he said slowly, they could be destroyed. Genghis nodded. We learn, as they do. Then, in the sky above, the red beacon changed. It did not vanish. It did not call for more. It shifted, not to another color, but to something new, something unseen before. Subutai exhaled. That is also new. Genghis Khan smiled, slow and sharp. Then we will teach them what it means to be old. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The red beacon did not fade. It did not flicker. It did not summon another wave of warships or warriors. Instead, it changed. The sky, once dark and endless, now bent around it. The stars themselves seemed to warp, as if the heavens were being rewritten. The Mongols, who had fought without fear against the unnatural, now stood uneasy beneath the glow, their hands tightening on their weapons. Even the wind, so constant across the steppe, had gone still. Genghis Khan studied the light with narrowed eyes. It was not a signal, not a call for reinforcements. It was something else. Subutai reined his horse beside him. They are doing something, he said, voice low. Yes, Genghis replied, but so are we. They had trapped the war machine. They had burned the first wave. They had forced the Zaltharian to react. And now, the Mongols were watching, learning. Genghis turned his gaze from the sky to his warriors. Some still whispered of dark spirits, of demons from beyond. But their hands had not wavered when the battle began. They had fought, adapted, survived. Now, they would take the fight to the enemy. He raised his hand, and the army moved. They did not scatter and retreat or charge blindly into the unknown. Instead, they shifted outward, fanning across the land, spreading as they always had, unstoppable, unpredictable, untethered by the rigid formations their enemies relied upon. If the Zaltharian wished to control this world, they would have to find them first. The Mongols disappeared into the night. The Zaltharian did not chase. They did something worse. The light bled downward, seeping into the earth like molten iron. The ground shuddered. The scorched battlefield, littered with fallen aliens and warriors alike, moved. The bodies of the dead, Mongol and Zaltharian both, began to rise. Not as themselves, as something else. Genghis and his men, now miles from the battlefield, felt the shift in the land before they saw it. His horse faltered beneath him, uneasy. The men around him murmured, their voices edged with something foreign, doubt. A scout came riding hard from the west. His face was pale beneath the dirt and blood. The dead, he gasped. They walk. Subutai's expression did not change. They have always done that, he said. We cut them down, and they rise. The scout shook his head. Not this time. Genghis did not ask what he meant. He rode. When they crested the next ridge, they saw it. The battlefield they had left behind was no longer theirs. The Zaltharian had not merely resurrected their own. They had taken everything. Mongol dead, their bodies twisted and hollow, now moved with alien precision. Warriors who had fought for their Khan hours ago now turned their blades against the living. The Zaltharian had adapted. They could not kill the Mongols, so they had chosen something worse. They would erase them. Genghis Khan sat silent for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "They do not understand what they have done," he said finally. Subbatai did not speak, waiting for him to continue. "They think a man is only his body," Genghis said, watching as the twisted corpses marched. "They do not know that a Mongol is not flesh alone." He turned to his general. "They have taken our dead. Let's show them what that means." Subbatai met his gaze and nodded. "We burn them." Genghis Khan did not smile, but there was something sharp in his expression, something that cut deeper than steel. "If they would make our warriors into their weapons," he said, "then we will turn their weapons into ours." The Mongols did not mourn their dead the way other nations did. They did not build great tombs or carve statues to those who had fallen. Their warriors lived in the breath of their horses, in the movement of the wind, in the stories told beside the fire. Their bodies were not sacred. Only their will mattered. And so, the Mongols prepared to burn their own. They moved swiftly, raiding their own battlegrounds before the enemy could fully take hold. Arrows dipped in oil struck bodies before they could rise. Torches set the earth alight. The dead, the twisted, the stolen, all were reduced to ash. But the Zaltharian did not falter. They did not fear fire anymore. And then, the storm came. It did not arrive from the sky, nor from the land. It came from inside the red beacon itself. The Zaltharian were finished playing with the past. They had come to rewrite it. The sky split, not with ships, but with shadows, voids of shifting black that swallowed the stars themselves. The land beneath them flickered, rippling between what was and what had never been. Genghis Khan did not flinch. He had crossed mountains that no man had survived. He had turned rivers into graves and cities into dust. And now, the enemy sought to unmake him. But he had already become legend. And legends do not die. He turned to Subbatai. "If they wish to break the world," he said, "then we will break them." Subbatai exhaled through his nose, as close to laughter as he ever came. "Ow!" Genghis turned his horse. "We go to the beacon." His warriors did not question. They rode straight into the storm. The storm was not of wind or rain. It was not of fire or dust. It was something older, something deeper, something that did not belong to this world. The sky was unraveling, the air thick with the hum of something vast pressing against reality. The red beacon pulsed wildly now, no longer a signal but a wound, a tear in time itself. Genghis Khan rode straight for it. His warriors followed, their hooves tearing across the earth, their bodies silhouetted against the shifting glow. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The Zaltharian had twisted the dead, had reshaped the land, had tried to erase them from history itself. But the Mongols were not men who accepted the will of others. They were the storm that reshaped the world. If the Zaltharians sought to rewrite time, then Genghis Khan would seize it for himself. Subbatai rode beside him, his expression calm, his mind already calculating the battle to come. "They are not warriors anymore," he said. "There's something else." "They were never warriors," Genghis replied. "They are cowards who wield the illusion of power. And now, they have made their final mistake." The beacon loomed ahead, a monolith of shifting energy. Around it, the Zaltharians stood in formation, not in ranks of warriors, but in a circle, guarding the heart of their unnatural machine. They did not advance. They did not engage. They only waited. Genghis pulled his horse to a halt, his warriors fanning out behind him. The ground trembled. The wind howled, and from within the red glow, something stepped forward. It was not like the others. The Zaltharian before had been uniform, hollow, beings of cold logic and machine precision. But this one was different. Its armor rippled, shifting between forms as though it had no true shape. Its face was unreadable, not because it was hidden, but because it seemed to exist in multiple states at once. It did not walk. It simply appeared, its presence bending the air around it. And when it spoke, it did not do so with a voice. It spoke into the world itself. "You are not meant to be." The words struck harder than any blade, pressing against the mind, against the soul, against the very foundation of existence. Horses reared. Some men stumbled. But Genghis Khan did not move. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. You do not decide what is meant to be. The figure regarded him, its head tilting in a way that was not quite human. Then it lifted a hand. The world shattered. The Mongols were no longer standing on the battlefield. They were somewhere else, a place without sky, without land, without time. The beacon was still there, pulsing, but everything around it had stopped. Warriors froze mid-motion, arrows suspended in the air, even the flames caught in an endless, motionless flicker. Only Genghis Khan remained free. The Zaltharian stepped closer, its presence pressing against him like an unseen weight. You are an anomaly, it said. You were never meant to win. Genghis Khan exhaled slowly. He had walked through death before. He had crossed mountains men called impassable. He had conquered cities thought eternal. And now, even time itself sought to stop him. But he did not stop. He took a step forward, and then another, and the world moved with him. The Zaltharian hesitated. It had never seen a man resist the pull of time itself. Genghis Khan smiled. Your world is made of rules. He reached for the sword at his side. Mine is made of conquest. And then he struck. The sword did not cut metal. It did not clash against armor. It sank into time itself, tearing through the illusion, through the veil that the Zaltharian had wrapped around reality. The world snapped back. Time rushed forward. The flames roared. The warriors moved. Arrows flew. And the Zaltharian, for the first time, fell backward. The Mongols charged. Not at the soldiers, not at the machines, but at the beacon itself. The Zaltharian had built their strength upon control, of time, of history, of inevitability. But the Mongols had never accepted inevitability. They broke it. The first wave of warriors struck the beacon's foundation, axes and swords biting into the shifting, pulsing core. The Zaltharian forces rushed to stop them, but it was too late. The moment the beacon fractured, the sky collapsed. The storm turned inward, folding upon itself. The red glow twisted, bent, and then was gone. The Zaltharian forces froze. Their movements faltered, their formations crumbling. Their connection had been severed. Their power had been taken from them. Genghis Khan stood in the center of it all, his sword still buried in the heart of the shattered beacon. The last of the Zaltharian turned to him. Its shifting form flickered, breaking apart like dust in the wind. This is not how history was written. Genghis met its gaze, then write a new one. And with that, the last of the Zaltharian vanished. The storm was gone. The sky was whole. The land was quiet. Genghis Khan looked at his warriors. They looked at him. No words needed to be spoken. They had won, and history would never forget it.